Previously on Battlestar Galactica.
It turned inside out?
And it exploded.
Well, hey there everybody, welcome back to the channel. Brendan here, aka Cliff Jumper, and today is the day we've been waiting for a while to install this wonderful piece of technology, the Supercharger, onto my VR6 Corrado. Unlike some other superchargers that are out there, this one should be relatively easy to install and fairly straightforward. I don't have to run an oil line. It is self-oiling, and I think I've got all the parts that I need for it, so we're gonna go for it today. The trickiest bit of it, honestly, is going to be extending the mass airflow sensor wiring harness, and that is right here. So undoing this, undoing a little bit of the wiring so that I can get back there and leave enough just in case I screw it up, and making sure that I don't screw it up. But the mass airflow sensor has to get relocated down underneath there. So we need a couple feet, probably almost 30 inches of cable just to go down there. So I'm going to be creating a new harness to go there. So that's part of the job for today. The rest of it should be fairly straightforward. The old tensioner pulley system comes off. There's a new bracket that goes on there. Actually, the bolts for the alternator, which are down there, come off, and there are longer bolts for the idler setup. And then this little guy right here has to get, they say you bend it out of the way. I'm just gonna go ahead and cut it so it's gone and not having to worry about it, and we'll just treat that with some paint to make sure it doesn't rust. And the Z Engineering Supercharger has been rebuilt and should be good to go. We've got a fresh belt on it. It's got a belt system rather than a planetary drive system like the Vortex, so it should be good to go. Got all the various parts we need here. Actually, a few more parts are still inside my room of requirement, so I'll go grab those. But we should be in fairly good shape. So we're gonna get to it today, and you know, hopefully by the end of the day, we will have a fully functioning supercharged VR6. So let's see how it goes. Now for my VR6 fans out there, my friends who have VR6 motors, they're wondering why are you doing a supercharger instead of a turbo? You could make way more power on a VR6 with a turbo, and that is very true. But I'm just going to admit that I'm a supercharger fanboy. I like the cool factor. It's cool to have a supercharger on a VR6. There's, I don't know, some je ne sais quoi, some quality about it. I know it won't make a crap ton of power. That's okay. It'll be enough. I mean, honestly, the way that I've built the car right now, it already has enough power to make me happy. This is a slightly mildly built VR6. It's putting 204 horsepower at the wheels. So it's pretty healthy for a VR6 motor. And just adding a little bit more of go fast stuff will be fun, as well as the cool supercharger noises. So I've also got the wonderful factory correct supercharged badge ready to go on there. So that's been waiting for a long time. And inside my car, there has been a leftover from my G60 for many years, just waiting to get put to use. And that is this wonderful little well, not factory, but this boost gauge that was on my G60. So finally, it will have a purpose in life, and I will stop catching crap from people. Why do you have a boost gauge on your non-supercharged, non-turboed car? Well, now I'll finally be able to have some force induction and put that to use. So anyway, I mean, I just always liked the idea of a supercharged VR6. It's got some serious cool factor, and that's about all it is. I'm not looking to make big numbers. I'm happy with the numbers. And as many of you point out, it still has the automatic, so this is probably going to be rough on the automatic. This might finish it off and give me the excuse to move to the O2M 6-speed transmission that I'm almost ready to swap in. So let's just see how this goes.
5 minutes later.
Well, as seems to be the case with most projects, if you've ever watched my channel or ever worked on a project car, you know that things seldom go to plan, and today is just par for the course there. So I'm looking through all the parts of my supposedly complete supercharger kit and realized, of course, there are a couple of pieces missing. So I got to go down to the auto parts store and pick those up. Fortunately, 2 of the missing components are not a great big deal. One of them might not be a great big deal either. They're just standard, like, off-the-shelf parts. So that is fine. And just prepping to figure out what I need to do. One thing that I do see might be a challenge is, because this is an OBD1 car with a distributor, it has the idle stabilizer valve that feeds into the intake boot for idling. And this kit is supposed to have, something in this to allow the idle stabilizer valve to plug in. So what I'm going to have to do is modify it. Fortunately, I have an old oil catch can that has these proper size nipples on them, and this was not a very well designed oil catch can to begin with, so I have no issue ripping it apart and using the parts. And of course that'll just mean I have to plastic weld it into this. And this is actually, if you look inside, some sort of fiberglass material. So we're gonna use a combination of like JB Weld and silicone and who knows what else to get it to fit together as it needs. But we've got the car up off the ground. We're starting to just double check all the fitment issues and make sure that we're good to go. But short of just a couple of things, we should be good to go. Now, part of the process, you do want to swap out the spark plugs. Slightly colder ones go in, so we've got new spark plugs ready if you are going to do a supercharger. This is the part number for those spark plugs that you want. And we are going to be putting in a 4-bar fuel pressure regulator. Actually, I think I may have already put a 4-bar fuel pressure regulator in here. So I'm going to pop it out, clean it up, and just double check the part number on this before I throw the new one in. No sense in swapping out the part if I already have the part in there that is supposed to be in there. But in the meantime, I'm going to head down to the parts store, pick up a couple of hose clamps and a couple of small knickknacks, and we'll get back to it.
2 hours later.
So I haven't been filming this part just because all I'm doing is taking off the naturally aspirated stuff from the motor, but we've got this stuff out of the way. You'll notice I've already relocated the carbon canister back there. It does have to be in a roughly vertical position in order to function properly. It can't be sideways. So I've got it secured back there out of the way, not touching any of the hot stuff, so it'll be fine. And that opens up this hole down here for us to put the air filter and mass airflow sensor through. They will sit, here's the intake boot for the supercharger, kind of down like this. And there will be more piping that goes down deeper. So the mass airflow sensor will actually be underneath through that hole. And yeah, that's how that works. We are about to drill the hole in one of the intake boots so that we can put the return for the idle stabilizer valve. And that will give us full functionality with our OBD1 ISV system. So it's the supply run earlier took a little longer than I anticipated. I write it off to the pandemic, but I had to go to 4 different auto parts stores in order to get what I needed to get, which was just like hose clamps and a few simple things. So we've got it, work in progress. I will film a little bit more of this stuff as we're actually getting into the supercharger stuff, but this tensioner has to come off. There's a little in-between sandwich plate that goes on there that secures the top part of the supercharger to this. There's a different idler pulley system that goes down in there. So there's a few things, and then I think I mentioned I got to check that out and see if this is actually the 4-bar fuel pressure regulator or not. I don't remember. So I'll take it off and be able to read the markings on it, and then, it is the 4-bar. I can read it right at the top here. So I don't have to swap that out at all. That's already ready to go. Cool, one less thing to do. Bonus.
2 hours later.
All right, so we are just about to fit the supercharger onto there. We've removed all the naturally aspirated intake stuff and done a little bit of prep work. So there's an intermediary bracket that goes between the supercharger and the block. It bolts in here. The supercharger bolts on after that, so it's a little bit of a spacer. So we do that. And underneath there's another bracket that goes under the alternator. Now I think I probably need to do that bracket first, because after I get the supercharger in the way, access is going to be restricted. So we're going to do the lower bracket first, then we'll do the supercharger. This is the idler arm, and it fits over the alternator. So both of these bolts get removed, and they are longer bolts that go in place so that this can sit down kind of under it and around it. And in order to get there, we have to raise the motor up. So we're going to loosen the front motor mount and I'll raise up the motor, get access, and we're actually going to take advantage of the timing there to replace the front motor mount. And after we do that, we're going to do the rear motor mount before we do the supercharger. So we're going to do a couple of maintenance and upgrade things here. I'm putting in the BFI motor mounts. So there you go. The old one, it is just, I mean, it's squishy nothingness. It's just gross. There's nothing left to it. It is alright, so we're gonna put the BFI one in its place, which will be much better. If you're installing the BFI motor mounts in a Corrado, there's a couple of different things. First of all, there's this bottom plate that exists on a Corrado that is not on a Mark III. Otherwise, the installation instructions are pretty much exactly the same as for a Mark III. We have this thing that has to come out of the way with the 313mm bolts. That pops out, and when you put in the BFI replacement bottom half, you do need to use the hardware that's included, not the factory stuff. So there's a big silver washer that goes over the motor mount, and then a longer bolt, and that gets tightened to 44 foot-pounds. If you try to use the factory stuff, you will be in for a lot of frustration, because the factory stuff is not going to work. The bolt is not long enough to go through the new motor mount. So just be aware of that. And then this little protective cover, you don't need to use Kung Fu Voodoo Monkey Death Grip. They just get tightened enough that they're not going to work themselves loose. And that's it.
2 hours later.
So this is fun. The benefits of buying a used supercharger kit from a company that no longer exists, and having to source all the missing parts yourself. This plate is supposed to bolt to here with a double-sided collar bolt, and it did not come with that. So now I am left with two choices. I can either try to fabricate said collar bolt and bolt this to the head, and then it'll probably be way easier getting the supercharger on there, not having to support the weight while bolting it in. Or I can use these longer bolts that came with the kit and just go for it. I'm gonna go for it and just see if this works, and if not, then I'll have to do a little more fabrication to make this work.
2 hours later.
All right, starting to take shape, and that's going to be interesting with my air conditioning line right there. So just, let's see. This has to go in there. That all has to go in there. So that's going to be interesting. Definitely got some challenging stuff ahead of me to finish this. So, yeah, got a bit more work to do.
2 hours later.
I'm feeding a serpentine belt in. Now, there's not a lot of room in between the supercharger and the fuel rail here. So I'm going to just stick it through very carefully, get it on the top pulley first, and then feed it through all the stuff underneath.
Hours later.
So what I've discovered in the middle of this process, and by the way, I'm now about 12 hours into what the manufacturer said would be a 4-hour installation. So yeah, you can take the Volkswagen rule of engineering, whatever the estimate is of time, double it and then add a few hours just for good measure. And we're learning some lessons along the way. Now, I did do some stuff like I broke this ABS connector. I had to fix that. The one-way check valve that needs to go to the carbon canister broke while I was installing that, so I had to order another one. So that's gonna delay finishing this. So that should be pretty accessible before I put on the final intake pipe. I did discover that I'm gonna have to make kind of an elbow bend for the intake pipe between the supercharger and the mass airflow sensor, which is going to mount underneath. And of course, I do need to extend the mass airflow sensor harness because my used kit did not come with the extension. So we're just going to add wiring to it. Now, interestingly enough, I'm just going to pause from what I'm doing. If you are doing this and you're extending the mass airflow sensor wiring, you're going to notice there are two identical wires in here, same colors. It's brown with a blue stripe. Now, what I would recommend, if you screw it up, if you get them mixed, it's not going to work right. Your mass airflow sensor and ECU will not like that. So I'm going to mark one of them with a different color, and that will allow me to do the wiring without mixing them up. So that's going to happen. In the meantime, what I also discovered is the belt tensioner that goes around the alternator belt was not set in its most slack position. It was kind of in the middle. It had tension on it when it was taken off of here. So I can't get the belt on without releasing the tension on that thing. So I've got to take the supercharger back out, lift this up, take that bracket off of the alternator, adjust the tensioner pulley, and then redo everything that I've done to this point. So that's gonna set me back at least a couple more hours in the installation, which means I am probably not gonna make my target of having this ready for the Dubs on the Shore car show tomorrow, which is a shame, but I'd rather get this right. So we're gonna just keep on at a reasonable pace here, get it done, and I'll drive my R32 to the car show. So, like, you know, all way I have to drive the other really nice car. Anyway, I'm gonna keep at this, and I'm probably gonna take this belt as well and have it measured as long as I have it off, because I forgot to do that. And I would like to know what the measurement of this belt is so that when I eventually need to replace it, I've got the right measurement. So, continuing on with removing this stuff. y'all. So, update. Bad news. As sometimes happens with using used parts you got from an unknown source, I have discovered that I'm missing one crucial bolt to make this whole thing work. And that is what I'm simulating right here. This is the tensioner for the supercharger bolt, and it's supposed to have a fully threaded 80mm bolt here, which allows you to thread this thing back and forth and apply tension and adjust it as necessary. What was in here as I received the kit was a much shorter bolt, which actually wasn't even a bolt. It was just a threaded shaft with a nut on the end, which when you loosened and tightened the nut, all it did was make the nut get loose and tight on the end of the shaft. It didn't do anything to move the pulley back and forth as it is supposed to. I have found a bolt that is just on the near end of being long enough, but you see how it's threaded only to here, and then this is all just collared shaft? So this isn't gonna do it. This will not give me as much adjustability as I need in order to be able to get this on, get the tension within spec. So unfortunately, this is a placeholder boat. And I went to 6 local hardware stores and 4 local auto parts stores, and I could not find anybody that sells an 80mm bolt that would work for this. So of course I went online and I found something on Amazon which might work. It doesn't have a hex screw on the end. It's got an Allen key end on it, which might be difficult with clearance. I don't know if I'll have enough clearance to get an Allen socket in there once it's installed inside the car. So really the regular socket end is the name of the game here. And I did find a supplier that had those with the full threaded 80mm length. And it won't be here for a few weeks because it's coming from Europe, of course. So that leaves us at the place where I really can't do anything more in terms of installing the supercharger. There are some other items that I can do to prepare for the rest of it. So this is going to have to get dealt with. And as part of installing the supercharger itself, making all of the various connector pieces work. You know, this is going to have to go from the top of the supercharger. There needs to be a length of hose that goes over to where it connects into the throttle body. So I've got this silicone hose. This is going to be a sacrificial thing, and I'm going to have to cut that to a certain length to make it fit. Here we have the other part that I had to modify with the JB welded vacuum nipple on here. It looks like it should do pretty good. So I'm not entirely displeased with that, but that goes on the throttle body. So this will go on the throttle body here, and that allows the idle stabilizer valve, which comes out over here. That'll allow that to plug into it. And just put a little 90-degree here so that it doesn't stress, out the things that I'm doing. So that'll all connect. That's in good shape. With the motor lowered on the motor mounts, there is enough room for the collar to come off the supercharger and go down here. But I've discovered that the mass airflow sensor would be knocking against the frame, and I don't want that. That's bad for it. So we're going to put it underneath. So again, I have to do a little bit of creative engineering with some pieces and parts to get the mass airflow sensor down underneath. And of course, I will have to extend the mass airflow sensor harness by quite a bit to get down there. All of that needs to take place before I can finish this hole up. So that's going to be probably a couple weeks before this is up and running, and I'll be waiting for one part in specific to be able to finish it. And that's just how this thing goes sometimes. It's the nature of working on cars and doing custom work. So I'm gonna do what I can, wrap it up. That does mean tomorrow I'll be driving my R32 to the big car show, which I'm not broken up about because R32 is a great car and I love it. So I'll do a little bit of work to get that ready today, and in the meantime I'm gonna put all this away, do a little bit, I'll do the back motor mount and call it a day. But thanks for tuning in, and I will check back when we have the parts to complete this project. Again, just checking on my clock here. Okay, so according to the instructions, this is supposed to be a 4-hour install. We are now on day 2. I spent 10 hours yesterday, and I have spent 7 hours today on this. So we're at 17 hours in for a 4-hour install, and that is how things go here. I'll tune in and catch you in another time. All right, see ya. You can shoot me a direct message. You can find me on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook. You know, you can hunt down my email off of my church website. I am a pastor at Quest Church San Diego. That's questsd.com, and you can find me there. So anyway, we'll see you again soon. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope that you had fun watching this video. See you soon. Bye-bye.